Welcome everybody. So we're going to get into our top 13 AWS security and compliance best practices. We have put together a pretty good content set for you today. It's a combination of technical and also very business level as well, so for mixed audience. And we are going to get into these 13 controls and where they came from and so on. So with that, let me dive right in and kick this off. Okay, so the very first question you should be asking is that how did we come up with these top 13? So we're going to get into that. How did we build this up? And it's actually a combination of the Nist framework, the cloud vendors' best practices, which is the three-tier architecture we're going to talk about, and we're going to get into Center for Internet Security Controls, benchmarks, and of course compliance frameworks, and then we're going to jump into the top 13. So it's like a cake strategy. We got to build the cake up from bottom layer up to the top to give you those top 13. And we're going to keep the session interactive with Q&A. For those here that are live, you'll be able to ask those questions. So with that, a little bit about myself. My name is Kamran Mehboob. I'm the Director of Product Management for Security and Compliance Products. I work with enterprise customers and take their feedback and keep track of the industry and provide thought leadership back to the community. So how do we choose the top 13 best practices? Okay, so there are four key principles that we follow, and this is also the same four principles that we follow as part of the Cloud Gnosis security platform process that we have. We have over 200 controls around these four principles. So the very first one is the cloud vendors themselves, right? So they are telling you specific controls you should be setting at minimum, and we follow their best practices and have codified that as well. So that's important to understand. The second one is Center for Internet Security Controls. This is a consortium, a nonprofit consortium that you should become a member of and start taking a look at all of the controls that they're offering from Amazon, Azure, Google, and others as well. They also have OS hardening controls, which I'm sure many of you are using, but the cloud controls are new, fairly new, about 2 years old or so. They are somewhat maturing. Some of them, like the Amazon one, is fairly mature, and the rest are pretty good as well. And then we also look at the cybersecurity controls from Nist and ISO, which are very important, and then the compliance controls. So we look at those best practices as well and codify those in our framework, and they're part of those 13 controls that we're going to talk about. And the very last one, you were looking at the latest hacks that are going on around cloud, and we make sure that we understand those tricks of the trade and then have that codified in our best practices so that we can protect our clients and at the same time, tell you more about them as well here of those top 13. So this is how we build our best practices in our cloud security platform. Okay, so the very first one is the Nist basics. I'm sure many of you, hopefully by now, looking into Nist cybersecurity controls. It's adopted by roughly 30% of U.S. organizations and projected to be 50% by 2020 as per Gartner. So very, very strong, very mature, it's been around a long, long time. And also it's applicable to the federal agencies as well because there's a federal mandate by Trump back in 2017, executive order that all federal agencies must be NIST compliant. And we're talking about the NIST 853 Rev 4 controls. There are about over 1,000 controls spread across 19 different control families divided into 5 core areas. And that, of course, spans into GovCloud as well, which is also built on NIST security controls. So those 5 areas of NIST, and again, we mentioned over 1,000 controls, divide into these core areas. I'm not going to get into all of them, but just the ones that are highlighted in blue, because these are the areas that people struggle with. So the very first one is risk assessment. How do we do risk assessment of our cloud security? and how do we protect it with some protection technologies, and how do we do continuous monitoring, and then how do we set up our detection processes. So all of these are we're going to discuss in fairly detail, and then get into our control sets, the top 13, because that's part of the build-up process. Okay, some basics. You should be aware of the shared security model. All cloud vendors have that. They'll secure some things for you, but really 90% of it is you need to secure everything from applications to data to operating system to firewalls, and encryptions and network traffic and so on and so forth. All of that, you guys, the customer, are responsible for. Make sure you know what this is all about and what are the infinite set of configurations that are available for you in a cloud system to be able to control and secure your environments. Okay, as part of the Nist, we really have to talk about the three-tier reference architecture that Amazon provides. And again, it gets into fairly technical details, but one of the controls that we'll be talking about is going to be around IAM and Bayesian access. So it's important to understand what's a Bayesian access and where does it goes in a specific architecture. It's the jump server, and you can go into more detail on the Amazon website and learn more about this. But bottom line, you have lots and lots of controls that are designed for you. Okay, the Nist compliance and workbook. How do we get started with Nist, and what do we need to do? Well, there's a pretty extensive Excel file that you can pull down from Amazon site, and it'll tell you what to do step by step, including there's a free download of the three-tier architecture that I just talked about. You can actually set that up in your Amazon account and be able to test those controls. So what this looks like in reality from a services perspective. So just for one of those Nist controls, I just took one control. I think it was the access policy. And if you go across that table, these are all the services that are affected by that. Okay. Now Amazon doesn't tell you how to set the controls. They just tell you, according to Nist, you need to worry about all of these services, and then you need to set these controls what they are. They don't tell you, for example, for CloudTrail, you have to have it enabled. You have to have it version controlled, and you have to have make sure that it's not accessible to outside world and so on and so forth. They're not going to tell you that. Where do you find all that out? Well, literally, you have to hire your AWS architects and security experts on the cloud, and also compliance experts, and then they all sit down together and agree on these controls and how to implement them. Or you can license a platform that does this for you end to end. And obviously, we're one of those platforms at Cloudnosis. So, security and compliance, evidence collection and reporting. At some point, you will be asked, well, great, you have these controls in place, but how effective are they? And we need to see that whether you had them turned on 3 months ago or a year ago. So you need to provide some evidence, for these compliance folks, and in general, even if you were, for example, compromised, uh, the legal your legal department will ask you that, hey, can you talk about what controls are in place and how effective are they, and show some history that we have actually set these controls, going back before we were compromised. So all of these controls, all of these settings around collection is everything from log files to trail to config to CloudWatch, and the last one you see at the bottom is called AWS machine data. Now that machine data, literally, you can only pull effectively through APIs and CLIs. Because you can't go into thousands of menus and submenus and tabs and try to pull all that data. And frankly, 65% of compliance data, security data, sits in a machine data environment. Okay, because by the time you look at log files, by the time you look at trails, it's maybe an hour, a few hours have passed by, because you have to do correlations, to a few days have passed by, depending on how strong you are in how strong of a security department you have in managing all that. So, what's an example of AWS machine data? Now, again, why all this is important, it goes back to those top 13 security controls that we're talking about. One of them is, you need to have these controls turned on for logging and so on. And and it's just an example of the VPC, which is a virtual private cloud. That's pretty much every compute sits in. So easy to do on your left-hand side is to turn on log files, CloudTrail, CloudWatch, config, and Trusted Advisor. Easy to do. But there is enormous information latency and enormous, it requires log correlations to really understand what's going on and what needs to be set. So that's where the expertise comes in, and so on. But really, all of that really not going to tell you a lot of details around things like how many unused VPC internet gateways you have. Okay, you're just not going to know that from that data. And for that, you have to do your own analysis and your own metadata collection. And so, everything that you see on the right-hand side, enable flow logs, virtual private computing names, and tunnel states. All of that you can only pull through APIs that requires expert understanding of your AWS security at the component level. So, and you have to codify all that as compliance as code. So, it is very critical to have all that in place to be able to have a full understanding of your VPC and full security posture around that. And today, you have to write these codes, organize them, surface them into some reporting tools and so on, or you can certainly invest in some automation platform like ours, like CloudNosis, of course, has all these capabilities. So what's the missing link in a cloud security today? It's really that you have so many thousands of configurations that are taking place and changes on that on an hourly minute basis, that you really can't humanly scan all those quickly. So you need automation, you need machine learning, and you need continuous monitoring on your infrastructure and on all your configurations for all the cloud services that you're running. Um, and really, it's not cost effective to build your own, quite frankly, because it requires enormous expertise and investment. It's best to license technologies from vendors that are out there in this marketplace. Um, and we're going to talk about at the end how we do that. So, Center for Internet Security Controls, very important area. Again, this is part of our top 13 security controls that we're going to talk to you about one-on-one shortly. Again, it's all around core areas that you see there, everything from identity and access management to Kubernetes engine configuration that they talk about. Example of that is on your right from 1 through 16. Everything from S3 bucket policy changes to IAM policies, usage of root accounts, whether the MFA is turned on or not. All of that is described in the CIS controls for all the cloud vendors, and you can download that document and take a look at those control sets. Uh, Again, those control sets are through APIs and CLIs, or you can manually set them to the menus, but it's almost next to impossible to enforce CIS controls on any infrastructure without automation. So keep that in mind. I think you'll discover that pretty quickly, or invest in some tooling to be able to do that for you. So now that you learned all about those four principles and how those controls are managed and put together in our CloudNosis library, we're going to talk about 13 of those controls. Okay, some of them are basics and you're probably already aware of, but some of them I think you're going to find a few nuggets that should be of to you. So the very first one is use identity and access management roles rather than using root account. We walk into clients and it's amazing that 1 in 3 customers have root API access keys enabled. That's pretty dangerous because if you have that, anyone can take over the entire machine and they can do whatever they want with that machine. So The root access has everything, okay, and it's not restricted. And so really, you need to create users with admin rights using IAM controls, and of course at the same time make sure your billing contact is up to date so you can recover the account in case if someone has taken over your account. Review policies, permission, and use strong passwords. That's important. So in the IAM world, you have to make sure that the users have strong passwords in place, and you have to look at the policies themselves and go with the least permissive policies, and really ask yourself, how many people have unrestricted access to your network, and you want to avoid attaching policies to users, and you should be doing that instead to groups and roles. This is a very common failure that we find when we audit clients. So again, avoid attaching policies to users. You should be attaching them to groups and roles, and then the users should be in groups and roles. Uh, Sounds pretty basic, but you'd be amazed at how many people do not follow that, um, and which can cause a lot of problems, and also increases your footprint from a attack surface standpoint. So number three, enable multi-factor authentication. This is becoming very, very popular nowadays, where you have a mobile device or a Google Authenticator that can authenticate you as part of the password process. You should have this turned on automatically for all of your admin accounts, and it's a requirement for many of the compliance regulations like PCI. So keep that in mind. Number six, must use Bayesian login for each availability zone. So you're going to have your networks replicated in each zone. You need to make sure that you have this jump server that's needed to do SSH logins, to do maintenance and troubleshooting and system administration privileges. Make sure you have this jump server and you don't log into EC2 directly. Again, this is reducing why this is important in each availability zone. It's really to reduce blast radius, because imagine if you have one Bayesian host going to all of your zones. If your Bayesian host is compromised, then every single zone will be compromised. So at least this way, if one zone is compromised, you can shut that down, and the other zone can take over as a high availability zone, and you can keep your services going while you clean up the compromised zone. Okay, and of course, always avoid what is called AWS Account Vpc Peering. Okay, VPC peering is a control testing in our environment that we check for, and it's a no-no. It's not recommended, not even from Amazon. But again, a log file analysis is not going to tell you that. You need this automation capability to be able to do that. So just keep that in mind. Build a secure AMI image, Amazon Machine Image, which is a pre-built set of stacks that you can create. You can also make sure that the remote root logins, account logins, and just ask yourself that, do we need to have that much access? These instances, of course, are entirely managed by you, and the security falls with you. So make sure you disable password-only access to host, use SSH keys, disable root, remote root account logins, and ensure that only required applications and services are enabled. Okay, 30% of the customers we have seen that don't do OS hardening, especially around their AMIs. And there are tooling within AWS that can help you set this up very nicely, and kind of a flow diagram is shown up there. Encrypt your data at rest and on transit. So make sure that you have encryption turned on. Encryption gets pretty complicated within everything from ELBs to ALBs to within S3 buckets and databases and so on. Again, it's very, very hard to keep track of all this encryption flow of your traffic, and the cipher levels have to be strong. PCI now requires TLS 1.1 or higher. Ideally, you should be at 1.2, and also make sure that the key rotated for your existing CMKs, your customer master key. And encryption has to be across the board, especially if you have sensitive data. This is something that you have to do manually, requires a lot of work. I highly recommend that you automate this process through your scripting or have some tooling capability that will do this for you. And of course, Cloud Gnosis does very well. Uh, Monitor unauthorized access. So this is part of your CloudTrail service, which keeps track of alarms. Now, CloudTrail and CloudWatch are only useful if you actually set up the metric. And even after you set up the metric, you have to set up the SNS service, the simple notification service, that should be used to receive the alert. Okay, so it's important that you monitor these logs. You have to create a metric, which requires some expertise, of course, what you're looking for and what your trigger is, and then be able to generate the alarm and then receive the alarm and then take action on the alarm. So it's quite a few things. Now, we at Cloud Gnosis, what we have done is we have automated this for most of our signatures have alarms pre-generated, and it runs in near real time. I think within 3 seconds, we get the alarm in. Secure your S3 buckets. We can't say enough about that. In fact, most of the hacks that you see, data loss within the AWS world, is through unsecure S3 bucket access. Especially when you give access to a third party to do some data analysis on your data. They connect to your environments, they pull the data, they put it into their S3 buckets and start analyzing. Well, their S3 buckets is not secured, and through a third-party risk process, you are exposed. Uh, the best way to really make sure that your third parties have the hygiene in place is to either ask them for a report or run one of your security scanners that checks for all of this on your third-party accounts. That's highly recommended, and we think that that's where the future is. You can also check PII data in your S3 bucket through a service called Amazon Macie, which is also very good. That gives you a lot of visibility into which S3 buckets should be secured and encrypted. Number 11, use simple token service for vendors. STS is a capability that allows temporary access to your Amazon accounts. This is very much needed for third-party platforms. For example, Cloud Gnosis can connect to your AWS platform securely using the AWS best practices by using STS. This is what we use to actually potentially connect to your platform to analyze in a read-only mode your entire platform for security risks. Number 12 is serverless compute. That's getting very popular, and I'm sure you guys are using it too. But keep in mind that you need to control the blast radius with Lambda function. So very commonly we have seen that one IAM role per function should be used, right? And you should not share permission. Normally we see one role created and they share permission across all the Lambda functions. So if one function is hacked, guess what? All of your functions will be hacked. And Lambda functions working with users should not have access to account tables. Keep that in mind. That's actually very important. Number 13, simple email service, SES. It's one of the oldest service that Amazon has, and it's very popular. Uh, you have to keep in mind that there's a lot of spoofs going on with SES. So SES resources are not accessible to unknown AWS accounts or open to public. So again, going back to configurations, you need to make sure these configurations are set appropriately and they're monitored and they're checked all the time. Eliminate email spoofing by checking IAM controls for the proper policies. Make sure you have the proper policy in place. I'll give you one bonus one, the last one, which we just added. It's the Elasticsearch service. Very, very popular. People are using it quite a bit. They're starting to use it as a secondary storage, but you need to check that if it has PII sensitive data in there or log related data, then you need to, first of all, not have it open to public, and number two, most likely turn on encryption to meet compliance and general security rules, especially GDPR. So make sure that encryption is now pretty heavily used, and GDPR is driving that very heavily, including other compliance regulations. So in summary, what do we learn and what do we need to do? So in summary, cloud security has shared responsibility, which I talked about. Automation is key to maintain best practices and have the best compliance posture in place. You really need to learn those Center for Internet Security controls that we talked about for the cloud vendors that you're using, and start using that for starters at minimum. At minimum, you definitely need to gravitate towards the Nist compliance framework, and we said that Nist 853 is the one that you should be going with. So, and then after that, you'll discover that security in the cloud is about building code. So it's not about writing procedures. It's about writing physical code that manages all these controls and creates your risk management program. And 60% of your compliance program is going to be driven around machine data, which is predominantly accessed by API and organized through that. And of course, create a baseline by benchmarking your cloud footprint. The baselining and benchmarking can be done with any commercial tool. You yourself doing it was going to take too long, and it's going to require a lot of expertise. And really, in conclusion, all of the above can be achieved through commercial tool. So we really should be investing in security and compliance tools for continuous monitoring, reporting, and evidence collection. Takes me to, we're going to have a few slides here real quick. We're going to go through introducing our platform. So Cloud Gnosis has a complete end-to-end active threat monitoring, security, and compliance reporting system, and we provide continuous security and compliance scanning. We have alerts on vulnerabilities and config changes, audit reports on everything from security and boundary to compliance-specific mandates. We have a capability called Eagle Eye, which does policy-driven automation on any violations that you have, and it's a complete end-to-end process that provides you visibility, governance, and compliance. That's what Cloud Gnosis Cloud Eye platform is all about, and we support all of the popular compliance frameworks from ISO to Nist to GDPR, PCI, HIPAA, and so on and so forth. We have mapped these regulatory controls associated with testing. So what this means is that you don't have to worry about compliance reporting. We have done this for you, and I talked about the 4 principles as part of our security library. We have built that through these best practices, and it really helps you demonstrate compliance to your auditors very quickly, in a very reduced fashion. I mean, you can reduce compliance audits from days, weeks, months to literally down to minutes. And you could be up and running with our platform in less than 5 minutes, and compliance reports and audit reports could be generated very, very quickly. This is what it looks like. So we can scan an infrastructure and build this report on the fly in a second and tell you what's going on, which rules you are failing at, which resources are failing, and what the risk ratings are on those resources, and then provide an overall summary of your attack surface. Give you kind of by regions where the flaws are. We divide risk by groups, whether it's in IAM, logging, monitoring, encryption at rest, and so on, and by which regions these failures exist. And also the ISO 27001 and PCI and HIPAA, all these different regulations. A quick summary of all that on your structure. And we also show you, again, which resources are failing and how to fix those resources. We have one-click remediation capability, automation, and we also have complete instructions within AWS, how you go about fixing that and where is it located and which tab and so on and so forth. We have steps identified in a manual remediation process. If you have any questions, certainly reach out to us at info@cloudgnosis.com. We're pretty active on that, or sales@cloudgnosis.com. They can help you as well, or support@cloudgnosis.com. You can certainly give it a shot. and going for a 14-day trial, and it's absolutely free. Okay, at this point, I'm gonna open the chat channel real quick and see if you guys have any questions. Okay, question around how do you check encryption across the network traffic? So what we do is that once we scan your infrastructure, we have a topology of your infrastructure, and we know east-west traffic, and we propagate and run our control testing across everything from Route 53 to load balancers to going into the VPC and then into the S3 buckets or RDS or wherever the traffic is going. And that entire chain is checked for encryption, for HTTPSs, for well, TLS to be exact, and what the and you know, if it's a 256 AES or higher, you know, those types of encryption encoding that we have as per best practices of AWS and also from the security industry in general. And we can generate that report and tell you which point you're failing at and how you can fix it very quickly. And we can also turn on encryption for you as well and fix the cipher levels on the fly with automation. Good question. Question around how do you check IAM users and how effective they are? So IAM, we have a very extensive set of rules that we check everything from unused IAM users to things like the password strength, things like are the users tied to policies directly or are they a part of a group, which is a best practice. So there's like series of checks that we perform around that. Question around, uh, how do you, is this, is this similar to OWASP or, pen testing? No, we don't do pen testing, we don't do log management, we don't do OS hardening. Those three things we don't do. We do everything outside of that for your cloud infrastructure. Uh, and this is all about infrastructure configuration, monitoring, tracking, looking at best practices on whether you have those right controls in place. So this is really what it's all about. Okay, question around DDoS attacks. So we can prevent DDoS attacks by making sure that the WAF is turned on, by making sure that the the AWS DDoS service is on, which is extensive one shield. So all those things we can check to make sure that this will be avoided. We check auto scaling groups a bit to make sure that you are hardened for that. So that's the extent of our DDoS checking. Okay, we are kind of out of time. This question on pricing, please check the website. We have pricing noted on our website. You can freely look at that. We license by per instance, and it's $5 per month per instance. Okay, well, thank you all for joining today, and it's been wonderful. And so look forward to working with you all.